Welcome to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews.
Today our text is from Deuteronomy chapter 21. If in the land that Yahweh your God is giving you to possess, someone is found slain, lying in the open country, and it is not known who killed him, then your elders and your judges shall come out, and they shall measure the distance to the surrounding cities. And the elders of the city that is nearest to the slain man shall take a heifer that has never been worked and that is not pulled in a yoke. And the elders of that city shall bring the heifer down to a valley with running water, which is neither plowed nor sown, and shall break the heifer's neck there in the valley. Then the priests, the sons of Levi, shall come forward, for Yahweh your God has chosen them to minister to him, and to bless in the name of Yahweh. And by their word every dispute and every assault shall be settled. And all the elders of that city nearest to the slain man shall wash their hands over the heifer whose neck was broken in the valley. And they shall testify, our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it shed. Accept atonement, O Yahweh, for your people Israel, whom you have redeemed, and do not set the guilt of innocent blood in the midst of your people Israel, so that their blood guilt be atoned for. So you shall purge the guilt of innocent blood from your midst, when you do what is right in the sight of Yahweh. When you go out to war against your enemies, and Yahweh your God gives them into your hand, and you take them captive, and you see among the captives a beautiful woman, and you desire to take her to be your wife, and you bring her home to your house, she shall shave her head and pare her nails, and she shall take off the clothes in which she was captured, and shall remain in your house and lament for her father and her mother a full month. After that you may go into her, and be her husband, and she shall be your wife. But if you no longer delight in her, and you shall let her go where she wants, but you shall not sell her for money, nor shall you treat her as a slave, since you have humiliated her. If a man has two wives, the one loved and the other unloved, and both the loved and the unloved have borne him children, and if the firstborn son belongs to the unloved, then on the day when he assigns his possessions as an inheritance to his sons, he may not treat the son of the loved as the firstborn in preference to the son of the unloved, who is the firstborn. But he shall acknowledge the firstborn, the son of the unloved, by giving him a double portion of all that he has. For he is the firstfruits of his strength. The right of the firstborn is his. If a man has a stubborn and rebellious son, who will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and though they discipline him, will not listen to them, then his father and his mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his city at the gate, to the place where he lives. And they shall say to the elders of his city, this our son is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of the city shall stone him to death with stones. So you shall purge the evil from your midst, and all Israel shall hear and fear. And if a man has committed a crime punishable by death, and he is put to death, and you hang him on a tree, his body shall not remain all night on the tree, but you shall bury him the same day. For a hanged man is cursed by God. You shall not defile your land that Yahweh your God is giving you for an inheritance. This is the word of the Lord. Right from the opening of our text today in Deuteronomy, again, the reminder, this is the people of God. After the Exodus, they are on their way to the promised land. They've been wandering in the wilderness for the years already, and they're going to be going in to possess this new land, this promised, holy, blessed gift from God, the land that would be flowing with milk and honey. And that's the stress at the very beginning of the chapter. In the land that Yahweh your God is giving you. This is God's gift. Let's treat it as such. And so this first section is going to be working with this very different idea from the context that I know I live in. I live in America, where the context, the culture is very individualized. And that makes these texts difficult for us. This is a community culture here. Perfection has been demanded of the community in this promised land that they're about to inherit. And they are knowing, because of this sin, that perfection has been broken. They can't find the perpetrator. And so they ask on behalf of all people for the Lord's forgiveness. It's a foreign idea, but it connects very closely very intimately to the conversations about the doctrine of original sin, that the very moment that I was even conceived, I was already a sinner. I was already opposed to God, rebellious against God, stuck in my sins, preferring myself rather than the Lord's love. This is communal. That's our idea of coming from being one body as the fullness of creation, which then, more importantly, in our New Testament becomes one body as Christians in Jesus Christ, which is where this sacrifice takes our conversations. As we talk about the sacrifice for atonement here in verse 8, what a wonderful connection that we can share with our children to Christ. That is, that sacrifice was made to atone for the blood that had been shed. So it is Jesus' sacrifice, his blood that is shed to atone for our sins. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord for us. Second section is also a struggle for us to understand as we get into this idea almost of treating other human beings like possessions. That's a foreign concept for many in our culture today, but here it is right there before us. The text itself doesn't really get into that here, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on that. If your children are asking, speak with your pastor. That's why he's there. Ask him difficult questions, and that's a good one to ask, as it points us ultimately to the idea that we are God's possession, which is a theme picked up by Peter in 1 Peter. For now, we see this young woman being taken into a man's home to be his bride. But a couple things happen. First, she is basically stripped of all the things that remind her of her previous culture, whatever her hairstyle is that may have connections to some of the religious practices, her nails, her clothing, all of those things that were common and familiar to her pagan culture, as she is now being brought into this people and group of Israel, those are to be taken away. And then she is to be allowed, this is a thing of grace here, she's to be allowed the opportunity to mourn what she has lost. There is a picture of war that it's hard to picture war as a good thing. This is blood has been shed. Even in judgment, the Christian today does not rejoice in the death of the wicked, as the Lord does not rejoice in the death of the wicked. And so she is grieving the loss of her family. And this young man who wishes to have her as his wife and to start a family with her moving forward, he is to allow her that opportunity to grieve what she has lost. That is a caring thing, and it is a loving thing that he is to do for her. In our third section, as we get into the firstborn conversation, the man with two wives, one loved, one unloved, I would hope would bring your attention to another Old Testament conversation as we think of the two sisters, both married to Jacob. We have Rebekah, the mother, sending Jacob off to get married in her own family, in essence. She sent him for protection, but while there, he spots Rachel, who is beautiful, and he wants to marry Rachel. He works 7 years for her hand and then gets tricked by his uncle Laban, who under the cover of darkness is able to instead give his oldest daughter, Leah, to Jacob. Leah is unloved, Rachel is loved, and you get a whole bunch of things there in Genesis about that account. So similar to what we have almost here. Now the conversation, though, is focusing on this idea of the firstborn. In Old Testament culture, your firstborn son inherited everything at your death. You are not to despise your firstborn just because he comes from the woman that you loved less, which isn't a good thing anyway. You are to keep things in their proper order. There is an inheritance. The land will be divided. It is to be passed down from generation to generation, and this is a very intentional act that the Lord does in these inheritances, because ultimately they're going to bring us to the first, well, I think we'd use the word first fruit instead of firstborn more often, the first fruit of all creation, Jesus Christ himself, not created, but the King of all creation, the first of God the Father, the first Son, that kind of a conversation. Jesus, the ancestry of Jesus comes through these family tree connections. This firstborn thing is important. And then the idea of the rebellious son. It sounds harsh in verses 18 to 21, but what we see going on here, why the parents are actually having their son stoned to death, is all about the fourth commandment. Honor your father and your mother. But there was a purpose. Again, good order is involved here, but the role, according to Deuteronomy chapter 6, the role of the parent is to pass on the faith to their child. So if the child is dishonoring his parents and he's refusing to listen to mom and to dad, he is also refusing the Lord. And so they're supposed to cut off from Israel those who don't believe. They are to remove that evil from their midst. And that's the child in this instance. And then lastly, the man hanged on the tree. We've got the idea that death is a defiling thing. So we want to keep our land, this new land, this gift from the Lord, clean. Similar in some ways to that unsolved murder part to start the chapter. So as you look at this text yourself or with your children, a couple of questions that you can be asking regarding the rebellious child. You could look to your own children. I don't encourage using this as a threat, but rather you could ask them, when was the last time you didn't listen to something mom or dad told you to do? Why does God want you to listen to your parents? Why is that a good thing? Ultimately bringing them to this idea of the faith being passed on, that you have been given this faith to give to them, to share with them in Christ. And another good question to ask, and this one, our littler kids may pick up on this, but especially the older ones should be able to get this. What New Testament accounts of people being hung on trees can you think of? Hopefully the mind will go right away to two different accounts. Judas, who had betrayed Jesus, hangs himself in the field. But more importantly, Jesus himself, crucified on the tree, nailed, hung to that tree for us. This is a Bible verse that is going to be familiar for you. Galatians 3:13. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone who is hanged on a tree. This is our text for today. As we continue to look to Deuteronomy, we will look to chapter 22 tomorrow. God's blessings be with you.